So here comes the African giant. Many people don't try to get us the African giant. If you're more logo, you look at the best when you don't know, taking the logo, photo. You know the tool, let go, nobody do it better than me. Nobody do it better. Check a man, see, I know they want the ego better. Go carry down, because I do it better. Fire planning, love me, help you. What you can do, because I do it better. What you can undo, that's what your papa go better. That's what your papa go better. Yes.
Congratulations to the teams for making it this far in what was really a competitive tournament. We'll start with introductions for judges and speakers, so please be ready to unmute. My name's Estelle, and I'll be chairing this round. My pronouns are she or they, but please refer to the panel as a whole. I am joined by some incredibly strong judges. Before we move on to those introductions, just note that sharing pronouns is completely optional, so only do so if you wish. And in the absence of this, please just default to gender neutral pronouns. So without further ado, on to the panel to introduce yourselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Francois. I have no, definite pronouns.
Hello everybody, my name is Acheampong. And my preferred gender pronouns are she or her. All the best everybody.
Hey guys, Ayafa, he, him. That are my preferred pronouns. Best of luck, guys.
Sorry, my name is Masharia. I will
I'm
be part of the
Gertrude.
panel.
My preferred pronouns are her or she.
Sorry.
Hi everyone, I'm Tawfiq Allahi. I go by he, they.
Okay, thank you. So that's the panel. And now on to speakers, starting with Prime Minister. Please just unmute, let us know your speaking order from opening government.
My name is Lindokuhle and I'll be speaking first. Anam, Azhar will be speaking second. Both preferred pronouns of the teammates are she, her pronouns. Thank you.
Opening opposition.
Dan is going to be speaking leader of opposition. Bathandwa is going to be speaking deputy leader of opposition.
Okay, thank you. And then closing government.
The members meet.
Sorry, closing government. It seems like your connection is a little bit choppy, at least for me. If you could just repeat that.
Hello, my name is Abena Achiaa. I'll be the member of government in the debate. I do not have gender preference. My partner is Kojo Acheampong. He prefers this male gender pronoun.
Okay, thank you for that. And then closing opposition.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Andrew. I'll be member of opposition, and I prefer the pronouns he. My partner is Michael, and he will be opposition whip, and he prefers the pronouns he, him.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So 2 points of order in terms of offering POIs. Please do so in the text channel so that we minimize disruptions to the speaker. In terms of timing, Francois has volunteered to do timing with the bot, so pay attention to that, and please have finished your speeches before grace time finishes. Okay, I think that wraps up everything. Good luck to all the teams, and without further delay, I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister to open this debate. Here.
Thank you, Chair. Please just give me a young second to fix up my papers.
Why?
Okay.
That is because.
Sorry, is someone speaking? Okay, I guess that means I may now begin. Oh, sorry, papers are typing their own. Cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the very essence of law is that it ought to respond to societal ills and provide formal recourse so that people are able to challenge those ills and get some sort of ramification that significantly remedies the harm that they have suffered. We think that this is an aspect of law that is inherent to why it exists, but has, however, not necessarily reached out in as far as impact and benefit to people who have been on the receiving end of the worst ends of the worst manifestations of violence. Black people, literally everywhere. Women, again, anywhere. Queer, transgender bodies, everywhere. We think that it is important that the law has this responsive and reactionary and transformative capacity. A couple of concessions that we need to address in the motion. Firstly, would say that this is firstly an evaluative debate. We don't think that we have an inherent burden to provide a model, but we think that what worse punishment or harsher punishment ought to look like is the highest possibly conceivable punishment for violence in a particular state. Secondly, we would say that another important concession in this debate is that the motion assumes that there is in fact great harm that requires a response from the state that the groups who are on the receiving end of violence deserve. So with that in mind, I'm going to deal with three things. The first thing is that I'm going to answer the question, why disregard for intent in the process of justice or sentencing matters. Secondly, I'll look at why this change specifically has to be done by the state through the justice system. Anam will significantly deal with the impact of our analysis. Cool. So the first question, why is the disregard for intent in the process of sentencing, important? Essentially here, we need to ask ourselves, what is objectively the metric for punishment, and why is this change not necessarily contrary to that metric, and if anything, why does it add to its beneficial impact? We say that in status quo, sentencing and justice is often premised on proportionality to harm as well as deterrence. The problem with this is that it is based on arbitrary standards that are often academic, because at no point can they properly say that this is the most legitimate what's the sentence that we can give to individuals. And this is manifesting the problems that we have. Firstly, the sentence measures that we have include things like mandatory minimums, which are often not sufficient because they've been placed for like long periods and are seldom changed or improved upon by the state. But most importantly, subject considerations like intent usually decrease the sentence, because this is also part of the evaluative metric of how we grant an individual a sentence. So taking into consideration subjective external factors like their intent often decreases the sentence. An example of this is Amber Geiger in America, who thought that she was shooting a person who was trespassing in her house. And because of that incorrect intent, the judge acquitted her of the crime of murder because they genuinely believed that that was okay. However, panel, we say that the problem with this is that there's However, we say that the problem with this is that there's often very limited consideration of the victim more specifically, as well as the greater ramification that this has on status quo. The reason for this is that this metric is often arbitrary. With that consideration and contextualization of the problem, why then is the attend to justice specifically valuable? Firstly, we say that the reason important for us to intent is that the ramifications of the action of the individual often transcend what's the subjective intent. The reason for this is that firstly, society is racialized or gendered or sexualized in different forms, right? Therefore, historically enabled and privileged individuals tend to, historical privilege tends to inform an individual's positionality. What this means is that the actions of a person with racial or historical any kind of privilege tends to have ramifications in relation to others. That's why there's a difference in context when a white person uses the word nigger and a black person uses the word nigger, because historical enabling or privilege tends to affect your positionality. What this means is that violence from an individual is never a contextual externally. But secondly, within the people also racialize others, therefore the action by a white member usually forms precedent for other individuals. That's why it is predominantly white police officers predominantly killing black individuals. Secondly, we say that people are also informed by societal norms and relationships. Therefore, even if they form implicit biases and a person isn't explicitly bigoted, we say that these biases nevertheless manifest because of societal norms, and there's a responsibility to punish this in society. The second question is then, why do this through the justice system, right? Firstly, would say that the problem is propagated by the state already. Would say that the state has sponsored, firstly, violence in other instances, like the situation with the Rohingya. Secondly, would say that the state has often been responsible for slow-slashing breaks, like the ANC telling women to look within or have become victims of violence. The second reason why this needs to happen to justice is that in the present, there's less deterrence in status quo because the measures that are implemented are often low risk. That's why we think we continue to see a lot of the violence continue in society. Thirdly, we would say that we have to concede that the justice system isn't necessarily perfect, but we say that it's still nevertheless the most important measure. Why? Because firstly, we say that laws represent the morality of the society. Therefore, the law tends to set precedent on what society ought to look like. So even if we have bigoted people, if we implement laws that says that we allow gay marriage, that necessarily talks to what the moral inclination of the state ought to look like, and the fact that individuals who are gay and want to get married are given this privilege within society. Would say it influences the moral direction, even if certain people will not necessarily participate in the better side of that direction. Secondly, we say that formal recourse, when there's explicit law that enables morally acceptable and a morally acceptable outcome, even if you can't change that society in the present, is something that is valuable, because it means that even if people are bigoted and you're gay and you want to get married, you still have the capacity to get some form of legal recourse because the law in the present gives you that, given that we can't change people's moral frameworks or moral campuses always. Lastly, we say that precedent in laws that is targeted at specifically groups that are disproportionately harmed, i.e. the civil rights movement, tends to also disrupt norms that have historically existed for a long time and have often suppressed the rights and values of other individuals. So again, even if we won't change the racist society in America over 1 decade, having the civil rights law means a significant disruption to societal norms that changes the discourse on what Black people's lives, on what the value of Black people's lives looks like. But lastly, would say that people who are harmed actually want formal justice. The problem is that in status quo, they seldom receive this or receive the lesser end of it, like Breonna Taylor's family. We say that therefore there is an inherent value to buy into formal law or formal recourse, and we say that this is something that ought to be given at the worser end of something, because the understanding is that even if it won't bring back or undo the harm, at the very least, there's a formal proclamation of the law that says that a harm was done to you, and we think that victims in comparison deserve this, as opposed to a status quo that largely does nothing. Because I didn't receive clear eyes, I'm going to assume that the opposition agrees. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could mute, then we can move on to the leader of the opposition to present the opposition case.
Am I audible?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, cool. If you'll just give me a minute to gather myself, I'll start very soon. Okay. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. The reason that the opposition bench didn't POI the opening government isn't because we agree, but it's because the case that they ran is truistic. It's a case that says sometimes people need justice and sometimes intent may or may not matter. And so as a result, we can significantly change the metric of punishment. Panel, it is important to note that punishment is a part of the justice system that exists outside and separate to aspects of whether or not we consider something morally good or bad, whether or not we consider it a crime, and whether or not we think it needs rehabilitation. In my speech, I'm going to prove two things to you. Firstly, that justice and specifically punishment can never be a political tool. And that secondly, even if we were to accept that this could be used in some political instances, this is going to be significantly worse for the people that we care about. Bathandwa is going to come with another principle that looks specifically at the legal status of minorities and whether or not we consider this something that is analogous with how it is that we should be treating individuals within the state. Before I do that, though, I think it's important to give some real extraneous rebuttal to intent as a concept, but also just to recognize the nature of the case that we get from the opening government. So the first thing is that they argue to us that intent doesn't matter because, it doesn't necessarily matter how it is that you prepared for it or whether or not it happened. It matters what happened to the person. They say that it's about what you were specifically prepared to do, and that also we get to choose who is morally worse behaviorally, and that doesn't, that they get to choose, or they get to decide that everyone is morally worse on the same level as opposed to any form of way up. There are two things that are particularly important in response to this, right? Firstly, that analysis could apply in a variety of circumstances. For instance, right? If I intend to donate my money, but I don't get the ability to, that doesn't make me a morally better person. If I intend to open the door for someone and I don't, that doesn't make me any more of a gentleman. The reason that that's important is because people experience action. They don't experience intent. What that means then is that things like life and dignity are actively informed by the way that they are interacted with in the state rather than what it is that we think could happen. That is the exact same analysis that's going to disprove another principle that comes from the opening government, which is specifically that we can't, some people are inherently in some level of racial bias by virtue of society. And so as a result, then we can hold them to account. Again, the same analysis, right? It doesn't necessarily matter what goes on in your head. It matters about whether or not you were able to manifest that in the same way. For example, me considering murdering someone doesn't inherently make me an immoral person, and it also doesn't make me inherently guilty of a crime. Me deciding to pick up a gun and go to their house also doesn't make me a perpetrator of a crime. It makes me someone who thought I was going to do something and I backed away. The analysis of the opening government is that that decision to back away is morally arbitrary. Recognize what that means on a principled level then. What it means is that at the point at which I conceptualize a crime, right, at the point at which I believe that it's something that I might want to commit at any point in time, at the point at which I find myself uncertain, the point at which I find myself with a gun to someone's head and me finally having to decide whether or not I must kill them, it now becomes arbitrary as to whether or not I don't pull the trigger because the opening government's policy says that regardless of whether you do, you are still a murderer. So we think firstly on a principled level, it's not effective, but secondly on a tangible level, it makes matters worse. Their side is the one with more dead minorities. Finally then, I think it's important to realize strategically that at no point have we received analysis that links ideas of moral culpability, guilt, pain, or anything like that with the consideration of punishment. What we do get is linked specifically with regards to the justice system. The reason that I make this distinction is because of what I brought up in my introduction, and it's going to be the first principle that I introduce. So here, I'm attempting to prove to you that justice as a concept, as a moral construct, and the tangible realities of it as punishment are inherently meant to be kept separate. Firstly, we would say that proportionality is a very important concept within the state, not because we think that all crimes are equal and not because we think that all victims are equal, but because we recognize the coercive nature of the state as someone who monopolizes violence and the ability for that to be abused. The reason then that we keep constitutional checks and balances, such as restrictions on how it is that we punish people and actually the objectification of that punishment, is because we recognize that the state as an arm and as a body that can enact punishment has specific responsibilities to err to the side of moral caution. So even if it was that we think that there is an instance in which it would be morally sort of like more supportable to increase this punishment because it's something that like might be deserved, quote unquote, it's still morally difficult for the state to do that because we ought err to the side of caution. Secondly, right, this policy implicitly says that justice is less important for non-minorities. This is something that intuitively in this debate we might think is valuable and acceptable, but it's not, right? Because what the opening government tells you is that there is a need for increased justice, not that the virtue of the crime being committed is in any way worse. Why is that important? Because it means that this is a discussion about where we police and how we police. It's not a discussion about what we do when people get to court. If it were that, then what we would say is that white victims and men are inherently less important to the state and that their ability to be harmed is inherently less important to us. Whether or not we think that that's acceptable on a socially or morally sort of basis doesn't necessarily justify it within the justice system. Two reasons for that. One, because the justice system is supposed to protect all people equally. That means in terms of tangible punishment. Whether or not it is effective because of social biases does not play into the criminal justice system. But secondly, because we recognize the need for people to opt in. At the point at which our justice system is one that people are upset by, they feel misrepresented by, then there are significant harms. This is the premise that the opening government puts on us in terms of why they might want to justify it. But the problem is that opt-out is significantly more harmful. Secondly, then, let's consider the nature of retribution and punishment, like tangibly, right? Because it's this sort of weird alchemy where we say we're going to mix some people's pain with some more people's pain, and then as a result, it's going to be like some social good is going to result from it. So the fact that you were stabbed, then I'm going to punish someone else, and then suddenly, like by some weird science, that now means that justice has been achieved. The problem with that is the only thing that justifies that level of punishment, right? The only thing that justifies this random alchemy that decides that punishment, even though we regret it, is something that now must be enacted elsewhere, is the knowledge that it is arbitrary with regards to who the state is engaging with. It's arbitrary to the point where it doesn't matter who committed or who was the victim, because on a moral basis, that individual thing is regrettable. At the point at which we undermine that, we create significant problems with regards to our ability to rehabilitate perpetrators, but more than that, with regards to how we view race relations as a whole. As a final question from my speech, ask yourself what happens if someone who is tangentially racist accidentally crashes their car into a black person. At the point at which they are convicted for active racism, a war, like a specific crime against humanity by virtue of being an active racist, not only do you punish them for something that they have a strong conviction that they didn't do, but you further solidify their racist views by the idea that they have been unfairly punished on the virtue of the fact that they accidentally, arbitrarily hit a black person. The reason that that's important is because the opening government's policy or side is hinged on the idea that this is better in a societal manner for protecting individuals. At the point at which you bolster people's understanding of racism and pain, you make that worse. Very happy to win this debate.
Okay, thank you to the Leader of the Opposition. Now I'd like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hi, I just want to check that I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, starting. Okay, cool.
Just typing.
Yeah, is someone typing or is that the time? Can I? Okay, cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Quite simply, panel, the misunderstanding in today's debate on side opposition is very clear because they first start off by talking about why intent is not consequential in punishment. And this is exactly a concession to what Lindo started off the speech with, because that's exactly the point, right? Is that the reason why intent is not consequential is because we always base the law as a response to societal ills. But secondly, that we have to prioritize impacts in this instance. But thirdly, that the law in and of itself says things about society, which is exactly kind of the premise that the opening opposition runs on, right? Is they say, what will society make of this kind of change when we don't support the categorical imperative to be equal in the law? I'm going to deal with this clash first. Is there a categorical imperative to be equal in the law? The response to this is no, because the law is always a response to societal ills. In this instance, we are talking about systemic violence. You cannot deny that individuals within minority groups, be it women, be it trans people, be it anyone, experiences disproportionately high rates of violence. Lindo characterizes and says the reason this violence exists is largely because of an inadequacy for the justice system to respond in a protectionist way. Therefore, the adequate response is one in which we fix the justice system to respond to this and to create deterrence in instances where that deterrence has either been deteriorated directly by a lack of response of laws, but secondly, by a lack of response of moral weighing to this matter. The reason then that this becomes important is because we say that laws are always subject to change, right? This is exactly why we have courts that interpret the law that then make decisions based on outcome. This is why even constitutions are subject to review, right? It is always based on impact. But secondly, Dan says, well, the harm here is that now we have an understanding that some individuals are now more valuable in the eyes of the law and others are not. That's not necessarily true. What we're saying is that the law is a tool to get some kind of an outcome in society. Given that we have an existing problem in society that requires urgent management, this is the appropriate response of the law to feed that management. On analysis of like how we prefer policing to happen more or how we like prefer other metrics of reforming, those can happen as well, right? So we can say, sure, we can have economic policies that better the lives of minorities. We can have better policing that betters the lives of minorities. However, those impacts are largely very complex and will likely lead to some kind of long-term benefit. If you make a concession that it's important to reform other structures in society, you also make a concession that we ought to reform the criminal justice system. But secondly, that the criminal justice system is a really important way to reform because it requires some kind of an immediate engagement. It is an immediate response to an immediate problem that requires urgent attention. But lastly, it's just this gross mischaracterization. And this is exactly, I think, the problem in the opening opposition's case, is that they just try to run like arbitrary first principle. Number one, they're just running truisms because they keep saying we should do this in the law because this is how the law does this without any real analysis of why that ought to be the case. But secondly, they give this example of like, what if someone runs into a black person in a car? And that's exactly the problem, right? Is number one, those cases are not dealing with the crux of the harm that we are talking about, which is systemic violence. Even in instances where that becomes a fringe example, you have to then categorize why that is beneficial and why you ought to prioritize that instance in a world in which you've already made concession to a systemic problem that requires urgent attention specifically by the state. But lastly, they talk about how, well, this isn't the kind of justice people want. Number one, as a preemptive response to the kind of justice people want, justice always looks like what the victims want. In this instance, there may be individuals who don't want who don't want some kind of formal justice, right? Who want substantive justice. Number one, we think those are linked. Lindo provides significant mechanization of that. But secondly, please recognize these are individuals who have gone to court. These are individuals who are economically disenfranchised, who have spent money going to the court, pursuing litigation. For these specific victims that we're targeting, they do want some kind of formal response. They do want the courts to rectify this because that's exactly why they would bring the matter to the court in the first place. Sure, there might be people that don't want a response from the court, those people are not the ones we're targeting. Those are not the people that are sitting in the courts right now. What I'm going to deal with then in my substantive is why this is a good mechanism of deterrence and why deterrence is particularly important in today's debate. But for that, I will take the POI conclusion.
All right. This motion is supposed to be one that deals with the problem. Your analysis have been why they are being harmed, and so we should act. Defend why specifically your model solves the problem.
Right, cool. Because number one, a lot of the reason why individuals choose to inflict violence on minorities is because they know there will not be any repercussions of this. A good example of this is cases like the Brock Turner case, in which individuals even admitted to intent of harm, however, there were no repercussions that were carried out. But secondly, this is also informed by large amounts of systemic violence against women that goes unchecked without any real repercussions. But thirdly, also the inherent nature of these crimes, which is that often they are difficult to prove. The reason this is important is because the reason that these crimes take place is because of a lack of deterrence in the status quo. Because the criminal justice system is set up in which the cards are stacked against victims. The reason that that's important is because a lot of these things have to be responded to by the criminal justice system. This means the criminal justice system has to implicitly make the concession that there's a degradation of deterrence and create an increased measure to protect that deterrence. What this means is it means individuals are now less inclined to pursue violence against a minority, because even if we cannot fix that these crimes largely don't have witnesses, or that the courts are majority white, or that Brett Kavanaugh's in the Supreme Court, which we're happy with pursuing in the long term. However, in the short term now, individuals know that if they're going to make that gamble, they're gambling with a significant harm. They are therefore less inclined to play that game in the first place. Lastly, panel, let's just talk a little bit about intent here, right? Because we think, number one, intent is largely something that is cognitive, right? Largely, individuals may not necessarily think they are racist. However, because they've been socialized in a society that is racialized, sexualized, all the things Linda already spoke about, their actions are still influenced by that. This then makes an inherent concession by the criminal justice system, which is a reflection of the state and a reflection of the values upon which we stand, that there are already existing reasons in the status quo for systemic justice to take place, even in the absence of intent. Even if you don't realize that you are a white cop and you may have racial bias, this then forces you to make that interrogation. This is why on impact, it also means we get more interrogation of individual implicit biases, but also a more cognitive way up of where individuals choose to inflict violence and would decide not to, because they're either more afraid of the law or because they realize that systemic violence is a thing and their intent may not necessarily be their intent, but is racialized systemically. Very proud to propose.
Okay, thank you to the Deputy Prime Minister. Now to conclude the opening half of the debate, I'd like to welcome the DLO.
Hi, just check that everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Sorry, my partner was calling me. Please, can I just get a chance to sort out my papers? In terms of POIs, please can they be in chat until 5 minutes? I just need to be alerted. So like one audible POI. And then, yeah, we've done the other introductory things. And yeah, I'll start in a second. I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So the biggest problem that opening government has in today's debate is an issue of privilege, is an issue of the application of the law. So we tell you that they have a problem solution gap at the point where you tell us that people get treated differently within the court system. You aren't telling us why we should be changing the metric of punishment. You're telling us that we need more equitable treatment of people, right? Which means you have a problem. But what needed to happen in today's debate? I think there's two things that we need to understand. We firstly need to answer the question of whether or not there is an active need to make this kind of change in punishment in order to get some form of retribution or get some form of for the betterment of these marginalized groups. And secondly, does it serve the aims of justice? When we speak to the first reason of serving the aims of justice, I think it's important to note here, panel, that from the opening government, we get no analysis in terms of how the justice system works. It's not enough for you to say that there needs to be an active change in law. We're speaking specifically to punishment. We're speaking specifically to the judiciary. So there needs to be an analysis of how this actor works and functions and what's going to happen when we're going to change this actor, right, and how it applies the law. It's important to note here because everything that Dan says proves the fact that making this kind of change in terms of harsher punishment is not going to achieve your aims. We rather tell you that it's going to lead to a worse situation for these marginalized groups. So what is my speech going to do? My speech is going to speak to whether or not there is a premise or reason for a different treatment of these vulnerable actors. What I'm speaking to here is whether or not they hold a different legal status, right? It's important to have this discussion because this is a reason why we would want to make a change or treat them differently in terms of this punishment. What Dan's speech did and what Anam does not respond to in her speech is to speak specifically to how punishment works, right? To tell you that it is not just a political tool, right? We tell you that justice needs to be objective because it needs to, there is a specific to the approach to both the victim and the perpetrator. The point of justice is to balance out things, right? To achieve equity. We think for shame to the idea that government wants to argue that justice is not about equality, it's just about helping the victim. Firstly, this is an oversimplification of how justice works. But secondly, simply we tell you that it's not just about what the victim wants. At the point where we don't provide a death, we do not have the death penalty in South Africa, even though some individuals want that for their perpetrators, we tell you then that there are multi-layers to how we deal with justice. Those are the multi-layers that have been ignored by the side of government and why they cannot stand in today's debate. So now let's deal with some points of direct rebuttal from the side of government. So firstly, the first thing that they try to tell you is the fact that this debate is evaluative, right? What did we need to evaluate? We needed to evaluate how the justice system works. We tell you it's extremely important for there to be those mandatory minimums, right? These arbitrary minimums that a government tries to point out without telling us what is wrong with these mandatory minimums. We tell you that the nature of punishment is that it's something that is weird and therefore has to be standardized in order for it to get some form of legitimacy. They tell you that one of the shooters, Ampah, someone in America, forgot the surname, was acquitted of murder, right? Because she's a white person, right? And because she didn't intentionally, she thought the person was trespassing on a garden, that situation, you know what's going on, the weird stuff happening in that country. But anyway, here we tell you that there is no intention to kill an individual. Intention is important because yes, she is acquitted of murder. It doesn't mean we don't hold her accountable at all for harming another individual. We tell you we hold her accountable for culpable homicide, for manslaughter, because there's a different kind of crime that she has committed. It's important for us to not oversimplify how justice works, to not oversimplify how this entire realm works, right? But beyond this, we tell you that these ramifications, they say that these ramifications transcend intention, right? They tell you that it's about privilege, it's about the responsibility to punish. Firstly, they don't show you how we're going to achieve more justice for these individuals. They don't show you how we put them in a better position, right? Their biggest crime is the fact that privilege is not accounted for in terms of our law, and they tell you there needs to be a specific recognition of the harms that come to these individuals who are marginalized. Quick example in terms of South Africa, hate speech accounts for racism. That crime of hate speech accounts for how women are also treated and the bigotry that comes to them, right? We tell you that there's a simple way for us to change laws without changing how we apply these laws in terms of the judicial system. We need to uphold equity. And even if we tell you at the core of justice is some kind of equal system, I will take a pure I from CG. Now let's move into what I'm going to do in my speech, right? So firstly, I tell you that like the legal status of vulnerable actors is exactly the same as non-vulnerable actors, right? It's important to treat all groups of society under the law equally, right? This is not to say, because we tell you that the law is premised on fair and equal treatment, right? Government tries to argue that the law is not about achieving an equal and fair society, right? It's about regulating society so that we all have the best kind of society. That's something that you don't understand. But also, we tell you the only time we treat individuals differently is so that we can get to some kind of equitable situation. We have affirmative action because we're trying to get to equity. So at the core, principally, justice is about ensuring this, right? And we tell you that the justice isn't less important for these non-minorities groups, right? You need to tell us why their pain and the same kind of crime that is inflicted on them is something that should be less valued in terms of this. We need to understand that there is a straw manning of our case in terms of what we speak to when we speak about intention. We tell you that there's a tangible moral difference when we speak about intention, and it's extremely important to note this and apply it. Why is this important? We tell you that it's going to harm these marginalized groups because you're going to delegitimize their pain. At the point where a person is a racist and is a bigot, they already don't think that this is a harm that they've inflicted. If you're going to punish them for something that they don't do, you mean that they're not going to be able to get any kind of societal change because their attitudes towards them are going to be worse off. We tell you we need a societal change in thinking to remove this kind of bigotry. We don't get this on your side. What have we done in today's debate, and why do we win today's debate, even if opening has a different kind of chat? It's important to note that when we speak specifically to the judicial system and how it works, and what punishment means, and why we need to have certain standardization. Beyond this, we tell you that this is the solution that we've gotten from government is not addressing the issue. We tell you that there are other facets of law to deal with this. Changing punishment and changing the judicial system is going to be a flawed way of addressing this issue. It's going to leave these vulnerable actors in a worse position. What we then need from government is to show us how they're going to be able to apply this in a way that's not going to harm the justice system itself, because those vulnerable actors need the justice system. This is the only place that they're able to get any form of recourse and protection. Stand with side opposition.
Okay, thank you to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I would now like to invite the government member to bring us their extension.
I'd like to ask for a few seconds to just wrap up. Set my timer shortly. Can I get a confirmation kindly?
Yeah, so it seems a little bit to be fading out. Can you just try saying a sentence?
This house believes that judicial system should more harshly punish people.
Sounds good.
I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. The problem with the opening debate so far is that you don't necessarily get it. I'm not being timed. Speaker, the problem with the opening house so far is that you don't necessarily get a characterization as to the unique mandate and positionality of the criminal justice system. But secondly, they don't necessarily tie the solution we propose from outside of the house to the direct problems that these individuals face, particularly the context in which they find themselves, i.e., disproportionately high rates of violence, and that's what you necessarily get from quoting government as an extension in this debate. But before then, some extraneous rebuttals. Notice, panel, that we don't necessarily think that what exists on our side of the house is an arbitrary system like opening opposition assets, because we think what exists in status quo is that laws have like a legal range for punishment. So, for example, assault looks like between 3 to 5 years. From outside of the house, you are going to get the highest maximum punishment. So, for example, 5 years, individuals still know the law, they still have like direct principles, and there's direct accountability for the law. But what the difference with status quo is that here we analyze the nuances and know whether you are in, like, and consider externalities of the crime. On us of the house, we don't do this, right? But secondly, we don't necessarily think that it's our burden to defend crimes like which are obviously mistakes, right? Because we think that principles of the criminal justice system will still be upheld. So, for example, incidents of like self-defense, etc., would still be noted, right? But then they say, why should their pain be different from the pain of the majority? The answer is simple: because majority's privilege is directly commensurate to the plunder that society caused to these individuals. We are looking at things like slavery, things like colonization, things like women's subjugation that led to the direct emancipation and rise of mainstream, like individuals who fall within mainstream, right? But then they say the justice system ought not be a political tool. We reject that premise, particularly because the justice system has always served as a political tool. So, for example, we are looking at abortion cases like Roe versus Wade, which opened the Overton window for emancipation. We don't necessarily buy into that. But then rehabilitation is still on our side of the house, because we think that on our side, we collectively conscientize society as to what their stance ought to be in terms of social interactions and reintegration between minority and majority. Before that, let's go directly into our extensions in this debate. What's the unique positionality of the criminal justice system? And I'll notice that firstly, what exists in status quo is that we have the states like in three folds, right? So, for example, we are looking at the executive, the legislature, and lastly, we'll consider the media too, right? The difference here is that because of the political climate in these highly, like in this place with high disproportionate rates of violence, is that these individuals don't necessarily have access to the executive and legislature. This is because of two things: one, poor lobbying power, but secondly, underrepresentation in Congress and other like parliaments. The third thing is that even if they have representation to put out their needs and ensure for emancipation, this particularly does not materialize because we are looking at tokenistic benefits from the states, right? How does the CJS uniquely help these individuals? Because notice, panel, that we think the CJS has constantly served as a body to allow for these individuals to, like these minority groups, emancipate, right? We are looking at Brown versus Wade, which ended the segregation of Black kids in college, right? We are looking at Browder versus Gay, which ended segregation like in buses in terms of racial. We're looking at issues of Capitol Hill, etc. Why is this not enough, right? Because we think that the criminal justice system in these particular spaces are still losing relevance because these interpretative work in and of themselves are not enough. What we ought to do is trickle down this punishment directly to individuals to ensure a maximum benefit on their side. But lastly, on the third arm, i.e. media, right, and how we spark a unique conversation on our side of the house. Because we think that these individuals in and of themselves do not necessarily have access to state structures For example, like the media that allows them to amplify their struggles and conscientize individuals, considering the context in which they find themselves. At best, even in the court of public opinion, they are unable to send out their views, etc. Right? We think on our side, we provide a unique form of advocacy and civil liberty that allows these individuals to do so. That harsher punishment we tie there is to one, send out an urgency as to the need to reintegrate society and ensure collective emancipation for every single individual. Now, the solutions and the unique benefits you get from us, right? Because notice that you are open does not necessarily tell you how all like this particular policy is directly going to ensure the benefits, right? Because notice, panel, the cause of problems in these particular states is because of the stereotype people in mainstream have about people in minority groups. This stereotype looks like these individuals considering them to be lower class citizens because of their poor quality of life. This high rate of violence means that they are in constant subjugation, and no matter how much they try to rise up the social ladder, the social reality means that they are unable to effectively collectivize and emancipate themselves because of the constant state of oppression and violence, right? What this model particularly looks like is that we deter individuals from causing violence, but the trickle down here is we are able to allow these individuals have the collective space and the actualization to help them put in place pragmatic structures that allows them to collectively emancipate, or even at best individually emancipate, because now a woman does not necessarily think about how her husband is going to beat her when she comes back from work because she closed after 9 a.m. right? We think that this particular this particular model is one that, apart from deterring individuals, allows us to reintegrate these individuals in society. I'll take a POI from Olsen quickly, please. Oh, I'll take it. Okay, 3, 2, 1. So, panel, this particularly looks like a unique form of integration, right? Lastly, again, what is the unique benefit we get from other side of the house? Because these individuals are in a better position to now spark active discourse that directly trickle down to other sides of their house, right? Because they know that when the criminal justice system, which ought to serve as an independent arbiter, is one that allows them to emancipate collectively, they are able to now redirect their political voices to other spheres, right? So this looks like them dominating economic spaces because they don't face violence. This particularly looks like dominating social spaces because they don't face violence. This particularly looks like dominating media spaces and telling their stories how they want it to be, right? We think that this particular unique benefit is one that has been is one that works, right? But panel, notice lastly that the mandate of the criminal justice system historically is one that ought not remain redundant, right? Especially in the context of this debate where these individuals face violence, and this violence disallows them to economically emancipate and debunk that stigma that they are second-class citizens. When we create this high threshold, irrespective of the backlash we receive, the unique benefit is that we emancipate these people, and the criminal justice system is able to be relevant in such societies we are proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much to the government member speaker. In terms of offering POIs, if you're going to do so, just make sure that you're unmuting before the protected time starts again. Without further ado, can I welcome the opposition member speaker?
Guys, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. All right, I'll be taking my POIs in the whip speech. Sorry, I'm being confused. I'll be taking my POIs in the chat space, sorry. And Please don't unmute yourself. If I'm not accepting it, it's because I probably don't feel comfortable accepting it now. Let me set up my timer so I can time myself, and then I'll start my speech. All right. Okay, sure. So I'm starting in 3. Am I still audible, please? So I start. All right, awesome. I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. The biggest form of justice is solvency in itself. And so without the proof of solvency in this debate, or if there exists any room for this model or approach proposed by Gav to lead to more exacerbated harms and negative consequences, you do not assure justice, but you further extend existential pain, which I'm going to be showing to you. Within the US, murder rates are one of the huge concerns, and different states within the US decided to adopt different models of judicial punishment to deal with this issue of murder rates. Some states adopted the death penalty because they felt that amplifying violent responses to violent crimes will reduce the murder rates. But what happened was that states with the death penalty rates saw a gradual rise in murder rates over decades now within states where the death penalty exists. Murder is 30% more likely to happen in status quo than in states without the death penalty, because those states without death penalties used laws that rather interrogated the social structures that prevented people from getting justice and improving access to legal redress. This means 2 things. First of all, their model has already been applied in another legal sphere, which is the issue of murder rates, and has terribly failed. It just didn't fail, it exacerbated the rate of murder in those particular societies. It then means that there exists a burden on Gav to prove why such an outcome would not happen again, even though there was a try within the judicial system in a different legal sphere and it terribly failed. You do not provide that because we have precedents to show that that model has failed. For you to win this debate, you need to show that that terrible outcome is uniquely not going to happen on your side due to certain unique consequences. You do not get that analysis from them. The radicalization and exacerbation that happened in the case of murder rates in states where there were murder and death punishments, right, was that the disproportionately harsh punishment, what it did was to give the perpetrators a claim to feel oppressed, a claim to feel disenfranchised, and a claim to feel actively misrepresented within the legal system, because you concede you disproportionately punish them. What you then do is to give them a legitimate claim to victimhood, and to defend that victimhood, they radicalize and do not engage rationally with the judicial system. For the social harms and crimes being done in this society, in society are usually facilitated within oppressive social institutions, like social harms that we are all talking about, like patriarchy, like women being subjugated, rape, etc., are usually facilitated by social institutions like religion, family, culture, and tradition, which are mostly imperceptible to the judicial system. Why is this true? Because most victims are made to use out-of-court settlements, home courts, religious clerics, etc., who continuously rule in the favor of the oppressors. Why is this true? And this is so because the legal system, which is supposed to be the alternative to these family courts, have a lot of barriers of entry, like high legal costs, poor representation by public defenders who you can go to if you are poor due to their overwhelming burdens of cases, lack of legal education and knowledge about the law for those victims in themselves, for them to have the incentive to be able to access these legal systems. And this means that more people in status quo who are victims do not have access to the legal system. The claim that the perpetrators by OG and CG
the claim that the perpetrators who are tried in court due to the perpetrators who are tried in court are let go and largely not punished is not true due to the media attention, the activism sensitivity that comes with these cases. So, for example, when somebody is convicted or is arrested for rape, there are activists within the local settings that pick up this issue. There's media sensitivity that come up with this issue. Those things put pressure on the legal system to deliver justice, to serve as an exemplary model for all those perpetrators outside. That's how don't access the legal systems, even though perpetrators are punished or are more likely to be punished within the current legal framework. At best, GAF's model only protects the few people who can access the justice system. So what they do is to massively allow the crimes to happen, but do not create systems that give people the means of redress. Our model warrants that access, and I'm going to show you why. Two things in this debate after this massive framing that largely engages almost everyone. First thing is the reason why you need to engage in a rational punishment model. The reason why you need to engage in a rational punishment model is that when you interrogate people's intent, you interrogate the underlying fundamental basis for which they felt that what they were doing was right, knowing that a lot of these social crimes are committed with the perception that those people are right. So, for example, patriarch things in the family structure that they are right to slap their wives anytime they want. Their world that disregards the intent means you do not interrogate the intent at all. It means that you do not subject the perpetrator to that rational interrogation for them to reach a point of concession, which is the fundamental thing you need to do to be able to spark internal change within those individuals. It means their world produces recidivist criminals, which means that when they return from prison, they are more likely to commit those crimes again. That intrinsically is a failure of the judicial system that massively exists on their side. The second piece of analysis is what you need to do. Our counter model then becomes, we think that the judicial system or the model in this debate should focus on giving people more access to the judicial system because the system currently has prioritized punishing perpetrators due to the high activism that has built up over time. So we think that things like massive legal education for people within these communities to have sensitization about their legal rights and what they need to do. Some people don't even know that a husband slapping you is something that they can be legally accountable for. Secondly, we think that you need to engage in things like setting up quality community clinics, legal clinics that these people can access, that can help them to evade the kind of economic barriers, high legal fees, etc. Thirdly, we think that you can improve the public representation system so that these people do not have shitty public representation or very poor public and legal representation when they stack up against these guys. Panel, note, our world is the only world that really assures you of two things. First of all, massive access to the judicial system that has gradually become very sensitive due to decades of feminist activism and liberal activism, etc. So they are breathing down the necks of these judicial systems. The problem in status quo is that people do not access because they are caged within the social systems like family courts that are highly oppressive and do not give them that access. Our world deals with that. Our world rationally engages the perpetrators and sparks internal change in their minds to prevent recidivism. We win from closing opposition.
So thank you very much to the opposition member speaker. Now to conclude the Gov bench, I'd like to invite the whip speaker, government whip.
Hello. Hello. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sure. Okay, so my name is Kojo Acheampong. I prefer pronouns related to a cis male, and I'm the government person today. So I would like to ask for some seconds to reorganize my sheets, and I would present as soon as I'm done by beginning with a countdown. For POIs, you indicate in the test case, and I will take you in that particular regard. So I'm starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, in today's debate, the problem with side OO in like side up in today's debate is that they assume status quo, right? We think that is far more problematic in CO's case because what you get from CO is that our case has been tried. What he then argues is status quo. Notice how the unique extension from Abena in characterizing status quo and how the systems that are available to these people, so i.e. representation by way of legislature, representation by way of government, have all failed these people, right? The first distinction you need to note between Abena and like OG is how she characterizes to you the unique position of the CDS and how it can be used and weaponized in our world to particularly gain justice for these people who are constantly being oppressed within the confines of society, right? But I'm going to be doing very simple, very few things in this video. I'm going to be engaging directly OO and CO and by summarizing their cases, what they really stand for in full, and show you why Abena's frame and characterization deals with that, right? But secondly, after that, I'm going to show you what the debate is really about, what you should vote on, and how Abena used today's debate from siege, right? So, panel, the first thing in today's debate is OO. So from OO, they say that the justice must be an objective system, right? It should not prioritize minorities in any case. If you do that, 3, you antagonize the majority, there are backlash. And what that means that this is antithetical to the very instance of the idea of the institution of the CGS. Panel, you recognize that the CGS as an institution exists to cater for such nuance. So it exists to settle differences that exist between so that people are allowed to oppress people and all of those things. That is why the CGS exists to do, right? But not in the case where the CGS takes an active instance to prevent people from being oppressed, to prevent domestic violence from non-existing in society. We think that case is very justified and is what we really stand for in today's debate, right? Because in your world, what they do is that the problem is not so, right? Because the problem that every team has conceded to is that these minority groups there are a lot of crimes being perpetrated against them, right? Women are raped every day, women are raped, women are beaten, blacks are killed every day, right? They don't provide any solution to this debate. All that they say is that, what about the majorities? And I think that the mere fact that this majority privilege, which is why which allows this kind to continue perpetrated, means that the CDS must use its delicate position to act, right? So in that regard, that all loses this debate because they fail to recognize the problem. They don't even propose a solution. Now let's move on to CO, right? So panel, this is the summary of CO's case. That's one. Your case has been tried, right? Because in what we're doing, we decided to use capital punishment as a response to or as a punishment for people killing people. And I think that is not what the debate is necessarily about, right? Today's debate, right, is about how today's debate is not about responding it's not about responding in the same punishment, right, in the same form, right? But today's debate is about taking a harsh punishment. This is what this looks like. So, for example, if a woman, if you are slapped by your husband, right? What you are not going to do is you are going to also let you slap back. You are going to propose a punishment that is commensurate to the kind of harm that you suffer, right? So now, notice the nature of this harm that these women suffer, right? So these stand for psychological effects. They are not able to actualize. They are constantly oppressed in their society, right? So in our world, what we do is that we make a punishment that is commensurate to the kind of harms these people have suffered, right? But most importantly, look at how ridiculous their solution is. So their solution is that this media, we conscientize these guys, we tell them that it's not bad, we tell them what you did was bad, we tell women that the CDS can be open to them. But notice how all those things exist in Abena's court, well, because Abena tells you in today's debate, what they're doing is that they're going to weaponize our delicate position and CDS. What this means is that in a world where you make these things happen, 1, we get the media attention that we want. 2, what it means is that we are going to actually we have to come back. We have to come out to these people, right? And conscientize them that this is what we have now, and this is how you should come to us and avoid all those ridiculous things that Andy tells you. Now, this is how it plays out, right? We think that in our world, the CDS is going to override intent, right? And this is how it plays out on deterrence. So 1, and the society knows that it's okay for you to slap your wife, the CDS comes in and says, if you slap your wife, you're going to get 10 years imprisonment. What this means that people are now going to wait whether to go the cultural way or to go the cultural way and suffer a punishment. We don't actually get best, you better
I can't hear.
Okay, so I thought it was my connection. I'm not sure if it's the speakers, but I also couldn't hear. We paused the
Yeah, we can't hear. Neither can I.
Okay, government whip speaker, are you able to respond either in the text channel or via audio?
Rough. Oh.
If everyone else can please mute, thank you. Okay, it seems like the speaker is muted and member is reaching out. Thank you so much.
Your voice is connecting now.
Hello, I'm audible.
Hey, yes, you are audible now. We'll pause the timer.
Yeah, I have.
Hello.
Yep, and yeah, can you
Okay,
hear me?
yes. So I was engaging CEO on how they propose things such as media sensitization and all of those things and how it exists in our own world, right? So continuing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So panel, in a world where we've already analyzed you that today the CGS is weaponizing its delicate position in society to make sure that we solve the problem. All this means that it dawns on us to take the active step that Andy proposes to you. So in our world, because you cannot say that, oh, we are just going to increase the harms, whereas like people cannot access you, right? Because we think that it plays more in our world. One, use the media sensitization that Abena analyzes you to reach out to these guys, right? But most importantly, the case you get from them is that, oh, well, we should now introspect society because when you base on intent, that's what you get. No, we think that these problems span from one, religious indoctrination and logical discourse. We buy into that idea. What you don't do is that you want to reason with a religious fanatic, somebody who is so into patriarchy that he never wants to change, right? But then notice how that's already flawed because these things happen in society, the engagement always exists and then it has food, right? But in our world, we set strict principles that one, what you get is that 10 years imprisonment. So regardless of your religious indoctrination and all of those things, you're able to rationally weigh the impact and the harm that will happen to you, which means that you better get difference in our world, right? But finally, exclusively, what do you get from Abena? So one, Abena points out the problem. Two, she points out the principle. Three, she proposes the solution, right? And four, she tells you about the outcome. So on the problem, she tells you about how the minorities are being oppressed and how they lack access to the systems that are supposed to liberate them with regards to legislative bodies and all of those things. And he says that, well, you can do that in their world. It's a status quo and then it has failed us outright, right? And that is why in today's debate as the CGS, we weaponize the kind of power that we have. On principle, Abena tells us how the CGS has a moral obligation to prevent some of these things because that is why it exists in the very first place. This is a direct engagement to OO, which says that, well, we should take an objective stance. But we don't think that an objective stance, right, makes us very important. She talks about how the CGS is gradually becoming redundant, right? So on principle, we are the only team that shows you why the CGS must take a principle stance in favor of these minorities by stressing out the punishment. On solution, we tell you about how deterrence would actually outweigh, people will be able to weigh the kind of harm that exists in a world where they're able to perpetrate these things based on whatever lines, whether it's racial and all of those things, right? But lastly, what this means that, well, when you're able to weigh these things, when you're able to weigh these things, right, you are most likely to stop perpetrating that crime because you know that serious punishments await you in a world where you value your religious time. On outcome, Abena tells you how these things prevent minorities from actualizing and how our world frees up these minorities because they are safe. What you get from CO already exists in our world. It's already status quo and has failed. What you get from OO is a world that is antithetical to the very institution of the CGS. We think that we solve the problem better. Proud to.
Okay, thank you to the government whip speaker. Now to wrap up this debate, I'd like to invite the last speaker, the opposition whip, when you're ready.
Please, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
All right. Okay, so I'll take my POIs through the text space. I'll be counting down to 3 and then I'll take them. So 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Panel, recognize that in this debate, with the kind of societies that this debate applies to, with the escalation of violence across minority groups and all of those things, is indicative of one thing, that the widespread and sheer quantum of occurrences speak to the fact that these things are ingrained and institutionalized. But what you normally have in these particular worlds is that these kind of crimes are imperceptible to the court. So it is not a case that the laws are not existent in the first place. There are laws that prohibit these things, but then they still happen in a lot of instances. The problem is not also that the court is most of the times not able to punish the cases that come to them. It is also more to the fact that most of the cases don't come to the court in the first place. And so the imperceptibility of these issues mostly to the court. And it's based on the fact that these things are institutionalized by, say, institutions of family, marriages, like oppressive marriages that help the husbands oppress their wives, and the issues never get to court because of barriers that exist and all of those things, religion, family ties, and all of those things. So it means that the real solution to this problem in itself is not a sheer increment of the punishment to say you will deter people. But look, deterrence in itself is not a principle that you can die for, that it can achieve all the utility that you want because of this. Because of the systemic insulations in these particular areas, people don't commit the crimes with the intention that they will be caught. They commit the crimes under the perception that those structures insulate them from getting to court in the first place. So if your addressing mechanism is at when they are able to be proven guilty in court and you extend the punishment, it doesn't even get there in the first place. We are the world that engages those structures and bring more organic changes that work in that particular regard. But notice CG, very ridiculous when Adnan says that, they don't have to justify that in this debate, they have to prove that people who commit crimes just based on mistakes and all of those things are part of these. Because in status quo, mistakes of the law or mistakes of these things serve as mitigation for the amount of punishment that you can get. In a world where you want to punish people regardless of their intent, that means that you don't only seek to erase mitigation measures, but you even want to extend it in that particular regard. And so that does not exist in our way. So, the law can always be used as a political tool. We don't think that is important. When you let the law be a political tool, you erode the sacrosanct of the law based on its objective position. That has a lot of impact on how people respect the law in this particular regard. But panel, I'm going to analyze this debate on 3 themes: the principle, the process, and the outcomes in this particular regard. So on principle, 5 things. 1, on egalitarian presumption of the application of law. So we agree in organized society that we punish people because they have done something that is wrong. But a communicative enterprise of punishment and the law is not to say that we just want to punish people for fun. We just want to punish the idea that somebody has a decision to commit crime and next time they are likely to commit it again. So we want to erase the tendency of it happening again. That is why you want to punish. And so any form of punishment that does not engage the person rationally as a moral agent does not speak to their ability to either do it again the next time or not. In their world, where they punish irrespective of intent, you put those people in a position where they are unwilling to concede that they are wrong. They become more radicalized and more likely to become recidivists in that particular regard.
But more importantly, what you do is that you create a system of tyranny of the minority, and that in itself is terrible. The law is not merely responsive, but supposed to be a balancing act in that particular regard. Second thing on principle is that we don't view crimes through the eyes of the victim. So if you allow the victim to decide, they will say, kill everybody that slapped them. We don't think that should be the objective position of the law as a moral arbiter and a balancing act. The only thing the law has to do is to ensure fairness and also restore things to normalcy. Anything else has a different route to achieving that. For example, strengthening institutions, executive instruments to institute policies and all of those things to serve redress to all of those things. But next thing is that it is morally reprehensible to set up a system that insulates structural flaws and creates an illusion that you are solving the problem. With the adoption of such an overwhelming action, which in itself is not justified, you tend to be in a situation when you feel, oh, we've already done a lot for these minorities, and you are not likely to target on the core problems that lead to this. We think, next again, you create an inertia because of the huge burden that you place and a huge cost on punishment. We think that the gatekeepers, who are mostly likely to be patriarchs, the reason why Abena thinks political will wouldn't work, have the inertia and the resistance to punish people even more, because then it becomes too huge to punish offenders, and we think that is bad. But we think that the moral compass of justice must not exceed normalizing, but engage the root causes of the problem. I've told you that. But the causal links to this problem, Andrews told you in today's debate, is that these issues are mostly imperceptible to the courts and are ingrained and institutionalized by family, religion, cultural, and all of those things. What we do is that by democratizing legal access and reforming these institutions, we speak more to issues of rational reformation of these people for them to be able to obey the laws more and inform change. But more importantly, we think that social institutions are annihilated in a world of government, and there is no solvency in that model. But look at this. The habitual nature of these offenses means that because of the fact that these offenses are insulated with institutionalized systems and culture and all of those things, they are mostly habitual. With habitual crimes, they are more likely to be personalized to individuals. So unless you engage the major rational composition of their minds that allow them to commit those crimes, forget about it. You can issue death penalty and they would not listen in that particular regard, and that is important. But on outcomes, we show you how you antagonize minority and create friction between minority and majority. They become hardcore and even antagonize these minority members more. That radicalization is unnecessary. We eliminate barriers and speak more to institutional reforms and enforce the capacity in all of those things in that regard. We think that most of these countries, there is very weak legal system to be able to achieve this. Not only do we strengthen institutional reforms to make sure that people obey the laws, but also make it easier to enforce justice because people come to rationally engage with the law.
Okay, so thank you to the opposition whip speaker. That concludes this debate. Thank you to all teams. Good luck for the announcement. We'll be doing that a bit later. I'll just ask the panel to join me in the deliberation room.